Awesome. Okay, we've got a good roster here to start off this Transformation Thursday. So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we have some folks from around the world joining in today. This is J.W. Simmons. I am the head of sales development here at Entytle, and we're going to run this Transformation Thursday, same as always. We're going to expect about a 30-minute run time. And this week, we're really excited to share some unique perspective with you guys. So with that, we'll move along to the rules of the road. Please use the Q&A area for questions for the speakers. That's at the bottom of the screen, along with a couple other buttons on the Zoom bar there. There's a chat button for technical issues, and we're going to record the event, and we can circulate that out to our attendees afterwards. With that, we'll go to our introduction for the speaker of the day, Vivek Joshi. Vivek is the CEO and founder of Entytle. He has decades of experience across both sides of the industrial equation. He is extremely passionate about all things install base and simplifying the install base workflows to give customer-facing OEM teams an opportunity to do more with less. And additionally, he is the founder of the Industry Next community designed to help all of our industrial leaders share and learn from each other. So with that, Vivek, over to you.
JW, thank you very much. But every time you and DJ introduce me as a guy having decades of experience, I suddenly realize I'm not as young as I used to be. But regardless, it's always a good place to be. And then the benefit of having decades of experience, as JW said, is that, we've seen a couple of things in our lives, right? So it's actually quite good that we can bring together a series of experiences. As DJ said to you, this is a series we started a few weeks ago called Transformation Thursdays. There's a number of things we've seen over the last few years in this space that we thought it might be worth bringing to our audience on a regular basis, and really has to do with the fact that fundamentally there's a shift going on within the industrial equipment making businesses, if you may. Right? We've all been traditionally very happy selling equipment and maybe following up later on parts and service, maybe on an ad hoc reactive basis. But we're seeing a big shift in people thinking about this in a more proactive manner. It might be that the economy has changed and making people realize that the install base is valuable and aftermarket is valuable. It could be that this whole notion of servitization is taking off. But regardless, when we start thinking about what people are doing, it is clear that there's a series of transformations that need to get done. And that's what inspired us to start this series, because we see this more and more in our customer base as well. And so the way we thought about this session, if you think back to the last few sessions, and I see a couple of you who've been here a couple of times, we're trying to approach different topics every time, right? So collectively, this series will be almost like 30-minute lessons or 30-minute experiences that we want to share with each of you. Today, we thought we'll bring forward a combined and abridged, if you may, lesson or experience on creating targeted hunting lists. And the reason we brought that up today as an idea is, we had a webinar back in May on proactive prospecting and install base, and that is probably one of the most attended webinars that we've done in a long time. And some of the work we've been doing in a content marketing activities also kind of seem to indicate to us that this whole notion of prospecting is really beginning to resonate a lot in not just in our customer base, but clearly in the prospects we talk to. So what we thought we'd do is kind of put together a short 15-20-minute webinar today. Of course, there's 30 minutes runtime for Q&A. But if there's one thing I want to say to you is that you should really do prospecting, but don't underestimate what it's going to take. And over time, we've learned this with our customers that, prospecting, and especially smart prospecting, is really, really hard. But since the beginning of Entytle, we really focused on applying artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to this problem. And really, we've seen that AI and machine learning can cut through the clutter or cut through the problems we have and deliver high ROI results. And so that's kind of the simple summary, if you may, of what I'm expecting that you guys will take away from today's webinar. So this is just a logo sheet we just put in front, mostly to show that we've had experience over the last 7-8 years working with a very wide variety of industrial manufacturers, OEMs specifically. And if you look at them, there's no particular sub-vertical that pops out. Yes, there might be rotating equipment in some, there might be some controls in the other. But fundamentally, what every one of these has in common is the following. They have their products that last for a really long time. As a result, they have a massive install base, typically 10, 15, 20 times their annual shipments, if you may. But more importantly, these companies are committed to finding a way to really harvest the value that they know exists in the install base, right? So they're committed, they're motivated to kind of build the engine to kind of start monetizing the install base. And so when they start thinking about this monetization of prospecting or finding ways to make money, we've seen a variety of different ways people go after it. It's everything from the foundational stuff, hey, just do I even understand what my customer's done, and getting a customer 360 view for the technician or the marketer or the salesperson, all the way to developing hunting lists and modification and upgrade lists, and so on and so forth. So there's many, many different ways to prospect within your install base. In fact, we have a playbook we've created, an install base playbook, as we call it. It's about 30 different use cases. It's always available to our customers, or anybody for that matter. And we've open sources, which is to say, look, we're going to give it to you without any expectation, but if you see any other ideas, feel free to give it, share them with us, so we can add them there. So there's a lot of different ways to prospect an install base. And what we've seen over time is that industrial companies tend to just use some very basic traditional approaches to prospect, right? I call this thing dialing for dollars, because Lord knows we've all tried it before, which is just take a list of people, take a list of customers, just go down the list and start dialing for dollars, literally. Have an inside salesperson dial or email, without kind of really having any differentiation around it. There's no targeting. So ad hoc targeting is almost like an oxymoron, right? People just basically start bombarding people with offers and emails. And I've got emails from companies that I literally have nothing to do with it. In fact, recently I got an email for somebody trying to prospect me from Amazon store. And I'm like, wait a minute, you probably got my name from somewhere. You have no idea what you're talking about. So people just literally don't think about this stuff and do it. And then this very similar approach is reactive spray and pray and marketing automation, or lack of marketing automation, which is just put in your marketing grinder and let it go, right? So these are traditional ways people have done in prospecting, but it's very clear that there needs to be a smarter way to hunt in the install base, right? First and foremost, I think everybody we talk to and work with recognizes that every customer has a lot of value. So they're trying to get to every customer. They also recognize that because every customer is different, and they use their equipment differently, they have to create a differentiated and timely offers for their customer. But they also need to do this without really increasing staff. I mean, for those of us who's been around the industrial equipment companies, industrial companies for that matter, the phrase that goes, do more with less has been tattooed into our brains, right? Most of the people who work at these really small sales teams, both in the field and inside, but they're massive install bases. So it becomes really a mathematical problem to say, okay, how do you take the small team you have and kind of make this coverage happen across the board? So it is very clear that people need to be smart about stuff. And the question is, well, to be smart, you need to answer a few questions, right? And this is a struggle that we see again and again, which is many companies literally do not know where the install base resides. When I say reside, as in how large it is, where it is, who has it, and so on and so forth. They don't know what happened to it, which means, do they understand systematically, chronologically, in a time series fashion, what that customer has done over time to that equipment? Because if you've been around in the aftermarket for any length of time, there's a time component to it, there's a usage component to it, a behavior component to it. If people don't understand it, how the heck do they know what to offer? How do they target? What do you do about it, right? So these three questions are almost central and commonplace to every single smart prospecting initiative that needs to happen. But then guess what? People run into some fundamental issues that we see time and time again. This picture that we show with every prospect call elicits like head nods like you wouldn't believe, right? People recognize that I got a ton of different ERP systems. I got some legacy systems that have different, generations of data, and none of which talks to one another. I have different service systems. We're talking to a large equipment maker recently who've cobbled together 4 different acquisitions. Each of those 4 different acquisitions are 4 ERP systems dating back 25, 30 years. They're really old systems, if you may. And on top of that, they have 3 different service systems, right? Can you imagine that mess they have? And then, oh, by the way, they have Salesforce they're trying to roll out across the company. It's a colossal mess. And so when people are trying to get smart about prospecting, when people are trying to get really dialed into which customer to offer when, they run into this huge issue. And there's nothing more, there's no problem more qualified in my mind to kind of be solved using that. And so if there's a way to bring some intelligence to it, that's the one way to do it. That's like the promised land, if you may. And that's kind of what we've built over time, right? We've fundamentally built a purpose-built install-based intelligence solution. And it's really, the idea is to kind of build it in a way that all of us who've been around industry for a while know that there's these well-experienced people who we have in our company, tribal knowledge, if you may. We rely on those folks a lot to kind of get this intelligence. That can't happen anymore. So we need to build a more purpose-built, institutionalized way of driving this intelligence across every single customer-facing function. And so that's what we built. And so what I'm going to do today in the next few minutes is to show exactly how some of our customers have specifically used a technology we've built using artificial intelligence, machine learning, how they use it to develop targeting hunting lists. And this targeting hunting list is really an important notion for some of the reasons I talked about earlier. And it's also an important notion because if you do it correctly, you can sequence a whole bunch of targeted lists over time that brings you different ways to get after the install base. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about today. Again, as you get through these next few pages, if any questions that come up, please put in the Q&A section. JD will be monitoring it for questions, and we'll go from there. All right, so that's kind of the lay of the land. Again, we're going to talk about hunting lists out here. So in this case, I'm going to preview, or I'm going to share with you an example of a private equity-backed packaging equipment company that we've been working with for, I'd say, about 4 or 5 years now. Right. What's interesting about private equity-backed companies is that they, of all people, are very clear in the minds that the aftermarket holds enormous value to them, both in terms of growth rate, both in terms of profitability, and really from their point of view, a better multiple, if you may, on the valuation of the company. So they're really motivated to get the aftermarket up and running. In this case, this is a multi-division company. We started working with a $100 million division roughly to get underway. But more importantly, across the company, they made a mandate to change, and they appointed a new president, if you may, of the aftermarket business unit. So they carved this business unit out, creating it after dedicated aftermarket business. This president had a mandate to go drive growth, and he recognized that there's a whole bunch of changes to get made. So you can see there's some pictures out here in terms of what they make and how they work. And so that's kind of where the starting point was, if you may. And like everybody else, you know, they were using traditional approaches. They just simply weren't working. In fact, they had about 8 people inside sales team, in addition to the field sales of about 20, 25 people that they had. They had a huge installed base. I think, if I remember correctly, they had about 20,000 machines in the field, about 8,000 unique customer locations. And so if you think about it, there's onesie, twosies. I'm sure there's lots of ones, if you may. But in some cases, they had multiple machines in one location. And like everybody else, they were kind of struggling with this thing when we started working with them. So those are the traditional issues that they were facing. And then the question becomes, okay, Vivek, so what do they do, right? So fundamentally, what we've done is built out a phased approach to them, right? So we started creating a targeted hunting list. We started building out a phased approach over time that starts creating a pipeline for them and really start driving growth out there in terms of how we start building it. When you start thinking about this approach, it was a team game. Right? Just because there was sales involved in it doesn't mean that the inventory team or the production team wasn't involved. Doesn't mean that the marketing team wasn't involved. And so you had to make sure that everybody associated with delivery of the product, delivery of parts and sales, parts and service were involved in it. So it is very much a team game. And what they realize is that the collection of data that we have, and I'm not repeating some of the things I've shared with you in previous episodes, if you may, of this of the series. The data that we've got from them, I think we had about 20 years of data across multiple ERP systems, service, tech support, and CRM. We were able to build the analytic engines to create what we would call purchasing entity timelines, which is to say that once you saw the packaging equipment sold and installed, we were able to track all the different activities that happened to it over time, be it the parts transactions, service transactions, tech support transactions, so on and so forth. And the application of the technology we built, we call it internally purchase rate, but it's really a way to understand how often parts fail, how often service happens, what different parts go with what, how do customers behave in terms of their buying habits, and so on and so forth, and how do they behave, more importantly, by cohort or cluster or segment of different types of, not just equipment, but different types of behavior, usage behavior. And so we were able to kind of build that all out, and then use that information to predict and prescribe actions to them. So the small and mighty 6, 7, 8 people team really turned into a really powerful, focused prospecting engine using this technology, right? They were able to identify very specific leads and opportunities. They were able to create offers of kits, if you may, right? So if somebody bought a part A, they're able to offer parts B and C along with that. They were able to kind of start prioritizing the efforts based on propensity scores to say, okay, you know what, let's go after these 6 customers first, because they're the ones who show a higher propensity to buy all the time. And then they were able to then start building things like including getting rid of inventory by targeting things in a very specific manner, right? So we were able to kind of help them with these activities in that multi-generation plan that you talked about. And what's interesting is this customer actually just showed us some data recently that they grew their aftermarket consistently for the last 2-3 years by about 12 to 13% per year. And they attributed a full 4% of that, almost a third actually, more than 30% to the Entytle activities, right? They were able to increase their number of active transacting customers. So they increased that number by 2 to 3% per year. That sounds like a small number, but it is actually a very large percentage over time because it starts compounding. So they increase the number of active customers. They increase the basket size, the average transaction size by about 15%. And they were able to now eventually over 2-3 years, they started seeing the same customers come back to them more frequently than they ever did before. So collectively, those things add up over time, and that compounding effect will actually continue. So much like we think of compound interest on a principle that just keeps adding over time, this ability to make your customer, more customers transact with you, have them buy more from you, and have them buy more frequently from you is really a phenomenal compounding effect. So that's kind of what they've seen, got a huge ROI on the investment. And because of that, we've seen them take this idea of Entytle as a core part of their aftermarket growth prospecting engine across multiple divisions of this company. This is actually $1 billion plus company. So now we're in about half the company, and we're just waiting to roll out Entytle into multiple divisions because of this ROI. This is so important to them that not only does the president of the services division review these results every month with the CEO and the CFO, but it actually goes to the private equity sponsors roll up of results. And it's actually a really important initiative for them that makes sense. So that's kind of how we've thought about stuff, right? So our belief always, by the way, and this is again a very classic small Transformation Thursday bite. Our belief as always is that, you know, the value of the installed base is really the value of the business. And this company, the packaging company, is showing it in the context of how they're demonstrating in terms of the value they're extracting. Our vision is really to become the central nervous system for an OEM's install base. In fact, the real big vision we have is become like create an autonomous aftermarket, if you may, right? Maybe not quite autonomous driving that you see, but autonomous aftermarket in the sense that this just stuff happens automatically. And then the idea is to just make it very simple. So that's the kind of vision we've been working on for years. So AI is not new to Entytle. AI for hunting lists, AI for propensity scoring, AI for loyalty scoring, AI for kit formation. There's so many different ways we can apply AI. And now we're getting to applying generative AI for install-based data. It's actually phenomenal. It takes a lot of work to go figure it out, but we're now beginning to apply generative AI that you see, that ChatGPT is really generative AI. We're beginning to apply it for things like identifying and diagnosing service events very quickly. And then we're going to start making it almost like a co-pilot for sales, right? So there's a lot of stuff we're building that's related to AI and machine learning over time to realize our vision. And that's kind of where we are. But, you know, as always, we say that, you know, all this stuff starts with aftermarket maturity. I would not put keys to a Ferrari in the hands of a novice driver. So there's a whole multi-generational approach we need to try. We need to invest in and track. And that's kind of where we are in this process. So we actually have developed an aftermarket benchmarking survey, maturity curve, if you may. Here's a QR code for that. We also have it on our website. It's really something that we've developed in recognition of the fact that not everybody's ready for this AI approach, but you have to start getting yourself ready. Otherwise, you're going to get left in the dust. So please feel free to go to this website, go to a QR code, and use the information to fill out a survey. And we're more than happy to take questions. So with that, JW, I'm going to pause. I think that was my prepared remarks, if you may. I think I timed it to about 18 to 20 minutes, I think, roughly, right? I don't have a clock in front of me, but I think we're pretty close here.
We're doing great on time, and we had a couple of really good questions come in. Thank you for laying all that out, Vivek, through the presentation. So the first question, and you know, you kind of alluded to this as you were teeing up the use case. I think you'll have a good time answering this because we're hearing a lot after the fact now. But what what challenges do you see with OEMs that are attempting to engage their installed base without addressing their data quality first, and that elephant in the room?
The data quality turns out to be probably the fundamental and foundational challenge that these companies need to hit. And when I first started Entytle, we knew data quality was an issue. We knew we had to address it, but we always thought that the companies we work with will take care of that. In fact, one of the participants on today's call he'll remember this from almost 7 years ago when we worked with them first time, that we had a terrible signal, if you may, from the AI we were doing, because the data was really dirty, and we weren't really investing as Entytle in cleaning the data. We expected them to do it. And through painful lessons like that, we realized that companies are going to have really dirty data, and dirty is in all aspects, JW, right? It literally means poor quality data. Walmart spelled wrongly. Walmart spell is Walmart Inc., Walmart.com, all kinds of weird stuff, right? You'll see those things. Is data quality because data is not cleansed in terms of formatting and issues? And then there's lots of duplicates, right? You'll see the same account ID, same name show up in 15 different account IDs, right? So all that creates massive integrity issues. And after asking our customers to fix it and realizing they're not going to fix it for different reasons, we've basically said, let's just go invest in data quality. So we built our own data quality engine a couple of years ago. In fact, it's actually fully operational. We're using it almost in its entirety for our data prep efforts for everything we do as Entytle when we work with our customers. And without that, there's no way we would get the success we do today. So I would say that foundational and fundamental investment needs to get made in data quality.
Yeah. And that's definitely something prospects that we're speaking with come to realize, in some cases a little too late, and come back to address later on.
Yeah.
So perfect. One directly related to the use case, if they're trying to kick this off, how much of their team's resources are going to be needed upfront in this case?
So the way we built the Entytle solution is to make the workload on our customers as light as possible. Now, it is not zero, but it's light. And what I mean by light is that the implementation workload is primarily taken on by us and our solutions team, but they need some help with the beginning, understanding, and analyzing the data. So we will want to talk to not just the IT folks who can give us access to data and provide us data, but we need subject matter experts on the product and the services side. And the reason is because as we started looking through data, we realized that not only the customer master screwed up, the parts master screwed up, the equipment master screwed up. Just trying to understand how to categorize and classify materials is important for us, and that is messed up. And so we need some subject matter experts. But the way we build the implementation process, and by the way, the entire implementation takes about 8 weeks to get done, is the first week or two is in this data profiling and data understanding, if you may. And that's probably more frequent 1 to 2 hour long deep dives into data, just so we understand it. And then after that, we've kind of built it in a way that the load on the customer side is no more than 1 or 2 calls a week of an hour apiece. And yes, I use the word calls because due to COVID, we've all gone to fundamentally a pretty remote implementation process. And then we do it. And then when it comes back to week 5 or 6, once the data is prepared, once we load it into the Entytle solution, once we start getting the first results, then there's probably some validation and user acceptance testing that probably a couple of weeks of heavy load, but that's both users, subject matter experts, and IT. So I'd say a little bit in the beginning, almost nothing in between, and a lot in the UAT period. So I'd say, it's a much lighter implementation on the customer side than a traditional CRM or ERP implementation, and it's by design that we've done it that way.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. And then one more. So, I think this question is kind of asking about the path. If someone were to start with a targeted hunting list as a use case, what would an appropriate follow-on case be? And I know we showed that slide with a number of use cases on it, but yeah, what would an appropriate, or I guess easy follow-on to this use case be if someone were to kick off with this?
The things we've seen after targeted hunting lists, very often people like to gravitate to modifications and upgrades because most of these complex equipment businesses have a mods and upgrades business as well, right? As part of the whole services implementation process. So mods and upgrades tends to be a very typical follow-on thing. The other thing we've seen is that people are recognizing that, they're losing a lot of customers. There's attrition going on in the customer base. And so understanding customer loyalty, understanding what we call drifted customers, which is people who have gone away from you, is important. So as you get more sophisticated, you want to approach them differently. You clearly have a key account management structure for top accounts, but some of our customers are saying, you know what, I need to approach with the what I would call the drifting accounts in a different manner also. So they'll assign some maybe key sales or service people or executives to recover accounts back, right? So we see that as a thing. The third thing is once you have these hunting lists, you actually, quite a bit of our customers have indirect channel, sales channel as well. So it could be manufacturers reps in the simplest case, could be full-blown service providers who are channel partners of theirs. But because you overlay all this data into the territory of that particular partner, we're able to create these hunting lists for that partner. And so our channel management part of the function in our customer base also likes to use it because they enable their channel management efforts to go more smoothly. So those are the few things that happen probably in sequence. And I'd say that eventually people get down to, things like, who can I target during my travel, right? So we'll see people who say they use Entytle to look at a geographic view. And this is nothing to do with AI, by the way, but it's literally everything to do with just the fact that data is unified, and use that to start figuring out who I should visit during travel. But on the AI and targeting using AI, it's drifting, it's some mods and upgrades because we can understand life cycle behavior and some channel. I mean, there's a few other things out here as well. So that's kind of how this thing comes about.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think for that's our Q&A for right now, with actual perfect timing coming right to the end here. So any closing remarks, Vivek, or should we leave with the benchmark survey and see everyone next week?
I think we'll see everyone next week, but I think what I would say to you is that, one of the things I didn't put in my takeaway page is, do not be afraid of this big word called AI. It's just, it's just something that's been evolving over time, and all of us call it different things. But just recognize the fact that the data that you have today has extraordinary amounts of value that you need to harness. And I think that's really the point of AI. It's just a way to harness the value of the data you have. And you can do it. And there's tons of tools and technologies available for you to do it. You don't have to work with a company like Entytle, but there's lots of other stuff for the company with the right resources and wherewithal to kind of do that. So that's what the parting message I would have as well.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Yes, thank you, everybody. You really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you next time again. Bye-bye.
Cheers.